Hello and welcome to the third video in this series. Now, this will be the last one, hopefully, that has this slide presentation format because I have a whole bunch of new technology which I'm going to have to learn how to use as in improving my human capital, and then I'm going to apply that to make a new and better product for you guys to learn from. So, that's sort of apropos because we're talking about capitalism, socialism, and communism as ways of organizing industrial societies today. Now, people talk about there being two economic systems. That's two competing economic systems, and this has been the primary way of looking at it since the mid 20th century. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply as well today as it did then, and let's just accept that for a second. So everyone just sort of accept that with me, accept it. That is way more complicated than I'm going to be presenting here, and all these ideas are only the tip of the iceberg. This is just the most basic information, and I'm probably missing a lot. But that's what makes it so interesting. There's an enormous amount to learn. Now take a look down here. See this little column? This shows in a capitalistic system, this is a kind of negative view of it, how the society works. Where it says at the top, there's capitalism, as in guiding and controlling everything. Then there's the sort of politicians, kings and stuff, we rule you. And then the religious leaders, we fool you, as in keep you complacent, agreeing with the system. The soldiers, we shoot at you, just kind of straightforward. We eat for you, as in these are the very wealthy class of people who don't have the power of these individuals, but at least a lot of money. And then down here, the vast majority of people, we work for all, we feed all, the pyramid. And then over here, this is a good indication of the current crisis of socialism and communism, is that in a lot of cases, the countries who implemented socialist and communist systems have crumbled really substantially. Now, where did these two systems come from? The beginning ideas of capitalism are commonly attributed to Adam Smith, especially to his book Wealth of Nations. And socialism comes primarily from two men, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now, there's a lot of people in both of those movements, and they wrote a lot of things, but these are the main ones, especially the ones you need to know for the SOL. Note, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels. And Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, which is a huge, enormous tome, which I have not read all of. And the Communist Manifesto is a more political tract that uses some economic and political sociological ideas from that are later Marx put in Das Kapital. So here's a quote from Adam Smith to get a sense of what his ideas are. Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. So it's interesting, what he's saying here is that even though everybody's just out there trying to get their own and do well for themselves, because they're producing lots of things and they're doing it very well because they're specialized, everything ends up being more accessible to a wider number of people. And by improving the society in general, you raise everyone's living standards, so you do good for everyone by pursuing your own narrow interest. And that's a core, the basic idea of what makes capitalism a productive and good moral system as well. Now, Marx, on the other side, capitalist production, this is from Das Kapital, therefore develops technology and the combining together of various processes into a social whole only by sapping the original sources of all wealth, the soil and the laborer. So he's saying that in capitalism, perhaps people develop new technology and bring together a lot of really complex processes to a big social whole that raises living standards, but it only gets there by depleting some important resources. The soil, by which he really means the earth, like all natural resources, and the labor, by exploiting workers. That is, when the people who own the businesses take the vast majority of the value, the amount of money produced when laborers do their job. So laborers get only a little piece, the people who own it get a lot. And that he sees as exploitation and a deeply morally and socially troubling thing. So what do these two systems say about class relationships, the role of government, the nature of wealth, the nature of property, and about each other? Well, in class relationships, capitalism sees consumers and entrepreneurs as two separate groups, but mutually supporting. They both do good things for one another. And you are simultaneously, hopefully, both a consumer and an entrepreneur. People work harder if they can make a profit. So class is malleable. You can move between them, or that should be how it works. Companies make things cheaper and better in pursuit of profits. So in socialism or communism, workers will overthrow the capitalists, as in the owners. So the workers will control the system of government and the means of production, as in the all the different capital, like animals, like farmland, like machines, all of that, so that they control both what they produce, how they produce it, when they produce it, and how much they sell it for, the workers. Society as a whole is most important. And so instead of looking at individual goals and individual improvement, it's society as a whole. And that's how people make decisions. And then all people should be equal. So workers have overthrown capitalists, and then assumedly at that point, they become part of the workers' utopia system. Now, the role of government is very different in these systems as well. In capitalism, the government is to provide military protection, enforce contracts just to make sure everyone stays to their agreements, and it's not just whoever has the most power can just do whatever they want. Uh, it sets basic laws about, no murdering and theft, and especially private property protection. And generally, other than that, it should stay out. It's that laissez-faire, perhaps you've heard before. In socialism or communism, the people are the government, right? So it should be some sort of democratic system because all of the workers are directing the whole thing. Wealth should be held collectively and distributed evenly. So you don't just like get a paycheck. It's that all that which you make goes to the collective, and then based on how much you put in, you get that much back. How much labor time you've put in generally, which is different. Because if you think about it, you might put in, 40 hours work week at McDonald's, and technically your labor earns McDonald's maybe $500, $800 while you're there, but you might only make a small portion of that in your actual paycheck. In a communist system, ideally, you would make the entire amount of money that you produce in value. Now, there's also tight government control over all areas of the economy. The nature of wealth, as in like what is wealth for? What's the purpose of it? What is it? In capitalism, the drive for wealth makes people work harder, that profit motive. Poverty, as in not having wealth, means you failed financially, socially, and morally. You can think about that today with people blaming the poor for their state of poverty, or blaming someone for not lifting themselves out of poverty. In socialism and communism, the idea is that wealth should be distributed to each according to his contribution. And I mentioned that earlier. So however much you put in, however much value you make in your job is how much you get back. So there's still some motivation to get a job in which you create more value, but there isn't as much of a motivation to create some sort of company that does that. You might get together as a workers collective and collectively decide to make some sort of new factory, but there isn't that individual motivation, which is core to the capitalism idea. Now, in socialism or communism, the wealth gap should only exist between jobs of different difficulties or skill sets, really because that determines how much value you'll make in that job. Property in these systems is very different. In capitalism, there is private property, as in you own it, you have it, you're the only one who can legally make use of it unless you say otherwise. But it's passed down through families. It follows down your family tree. You can leave an inheritance to your children or whoever you determine. And you get what you can take, as in you get what you can take or make for yourself legally. So none of it's determined by how much you put in or how much value you're making. You could make very little value but still get paid a lot. So sometimes there's mismatches, and that's important to notice. In communism, property is held in a common pool and it's controlled by the government, who we assume are the workers. In almost all communist countries, that has not worked out very well. And then it's distributed according to various criteria, like need, or if you need more medical care, for instance, or based on how much value you put in, like we mentioned earlier, or based on where you live, which is part of need, but it's an interesting one. Brace yourselves. Angry debate posts are coming, because we're about to talk about what they say of each other. So, what they say about each other. Now, capitalism says of socialism that that system gives you no motivation to work harder because you can't possibly have any motivation when you just are going to give everything that you make away. Um, and they say it's dangerous not to consider first the individuals because you lose sight of the needs of individual people when you only consider the wider society. And that can lead to some really kind of scary ethical choices, like making the decision to, oh, just let this group of people die so you can save a much larger section of the population, which hopefully in a capitalist system, capitalism believes, you would be able to pay more attention to the individual moral necessity of the life of those people that you're going to let die. And they also say in socialism, you can't get rich. You can't break away from your former economic status. You're mostly stuck. But socialism says about capitalism that deep wealth divides prevent real participation in government because money, in a lot of cases, equals power. And so only those people who own, who get the majority of the value out of people's labor, have enough money to just throw around and become powerful in government. And then also, because then those people are the ones in government, they're the ones most driven by profit motive. And as a result, you have these profit motive driven, which socialist thinkers would call greed, generally greed, is a terrible basis for society because it alters your priorities as a lawmaker. So that when you go to make laws, you're considering mostly how to create the most value, perhaps, but not considering the whole society and the good of the whole society. And especially, you're more likely to consider your own personal narrow interest. And that's not good for a lawmaker in a democratic system. Also, in capitalism, according to socialism, owners mistreat their workers and take the most of the value of those workers' labor for themselves. And to a socialist way of thinking, that's problematic in and of itself. Also, what do they say about each other's beards? I don't know. Adam Smith, beardless. These are some pretty excellent beards over here. And I'll just leave you with that. Again, next week, I will be working towards getting some like better technology and some better videos here. Hopefully, it'll be more fun, a lot more images, maybe some video clips from other things on YouTube. And check out all of these resources that I've just showed you. That's where I got all my images for this presentation.